Hello, welcome to our presentation. The title of our presentation is What Holidays Do People Celebrate There? Language of Inclusion and Exclusion in an Intercultural Virtual Exchange Project for Pre-Service Teachers. And this study comes from a telecollaboration exchange between a university in the US and a university in Turkey. And we're going to present on our findings with my colleagues. My name is Baburhan Uzum, and I'm from Sam Houston State University. My colleagues are Bedrettin Yazan from University of Alabama, Sedat Akayoglu from Abant Izzet Baysal University in Turkey, and Netta Avineri from Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey. We're going to present this our session together. To start with, we're using the definition for telecollaboration as an internet-based collaborative practice for intercultural exchange between individuals from different ethno-linguistic national backgrounds and geographically remote locations. In this study, we wanted our teachers, pre-service teachers, to develop intercultural competence and an awareness for social justice, and we use Bayram 1997 intercultural communicative competence framework.
In the prior research on teacher education for social justice, there are three types of pre-service teachers in terms of their attitudes and dispositions. Some pre-service teachers enter teacher education programs with a degree of commitment to social justice. Some pre-service teachers have no explicit commitment to social justice. A third group of pre-service teachers exhibits reluctance or resistance to the principles of social justice in teaching. There are two main teacher education pedagogies that promote social justice teacher education. In some teacher education practices, pre-service teachers inquire into their own positioning in relation to privilege and marginalization and the social, cultural, political, and economic origins and reproduction of injustices. Such practices help them explicitly focus on their own beliefs and dispositions and understand the ways in which systemic inequities in the society shape the individual's access to resources. Teacher educators also attempt to effect change in pre-service teachers through a pedagogy of discomfort. With this approach, pre-service teachers can problematize and challenge unconscious complicity with hegemony as they inquire into their emotional investment in inscribed habits of inattention. Both pedagogies can be facilitated through telecollaboration. As individuals interact with people from other cultures, their first-hand engagement with otherness and their reflection on this engagement can lead to potential personal inquiry into the roots of injustices in their society and discomforting emotional labor. Telecollaboration constitutes a discursive and experiential space to discuss issues of social justice and equity. Recently, increasing number of teacher education classes have adopted telecollaboration to help pre-service teachers develop beliefs and dispositions to work with linguistically and culturally diverse students. Typically, in telecollaborative activities, participants are expected to practice the target language, gain knowledge about other cultures, reflect on their own cultures, and develop competence to critically evaluate social and political perspectives and practices. Although it has gained traction, telecollaboration has also received significant criticism from scholars who argue that telecollaborative tasks tend to include superficial discussion topics like festivals and food, and allow participants to avoid engaging in challenging and discomforting subjects such as gender inequality, ethnic, religious marginalization. Framing this study as a telecollaboration which aims to engage pre-service teachers in the discussions of the issues of social justice and equity in their own and peers' context, we address two research questions. First, how do pre-service teachers engage on and discuss multicultural education and social justice issues in a synchronous and asynchronous telecollaboration project? Second, how does language shape the pre-service teachers' conversations on these issues in these exchanges?
Context of the study. As for the details of the study, we can say that it was a semester-long collaborative project between two teacher education classes, and the project was carried out between September 2015 and January 2016. We have two courses at two different universities. The first one is multicultural education course at Central City University in the US. Another one is language and culture course at Northern Anatolia University in Turkey. And as for the research design, we can say that this study takes an action research and critical discourse analytical approach while examining the interactions within a cross-national telecollaboration project. we mentioned before, we have two groups of participants in the study. The first group is from the US, and the other one is from Turkey. In the US group, we have 22 participants, 2 males and 20 females. For the Turkish group, we have 26 participants, 6 males and 20 females. As for their ethnic backgrounds, in the US group, 3 participants were African American, 3 were Latin, and 16 were Caucasian. And for the Turkish group, they highlighted their national identity of Turkishness, although they had various ethnic backgrounds. In the US group, all participants spoke English as their first language, but in Turkish context, the participants spoke Turkish as their first language and learned English as their foreign language. For the US group, the participants were studying to be elementary and secondary school teachers in the US, and they sought state required English as a second language certification. But for the Turkish group, they were studying to become English as a foreign language teachers. While collecting data, we used an online platform which is called as Edmodo, and also we collected 3 different sets of data. The first one is discussion board posts, and the other one is transcriptions of synchronous video conferences, and the last one is reflection papers. The students discussed on Edmodo on weekly topics in groups of 4 or 6, and also they had synchronous video conferences on Skype or Google Hangout toward the end of the semester. And finally, at the end of the project, all preservice teachers wrote a reflection on their experience, and also we collected them on Edmodo platform.
The discussions on asynchronous boards were guided by the weekly discussion prompts, and in these prompts we wanted our preservice teachers to reflect on multiculturalism and how they experience several social equity topics around themselves and how they reflect on these experiences, such as religious diversity, gender roles, males and females, and other gender equity and other educational considerations that they see around themselves and how they reflect on these experiences. For data collection, we collected the discussion board posts and the reflections as textual data, and the video conferences were submitted as video files, but later transcribed by a research assistant, and these for verbatim for analysis. And we analyzed all textual data using open coding and axial coding. In the first stage of the coding, we stayed open to all possible theoretical directions, and in the axial coding we organized related codes together in an effort to create our themes. And early on we noticed the language, how language made a difference, and how students' use of language made a difference in how they framed their discussions. So that as a topic came up early on in the analysis. At the end of our analysis, in our findings, we found that the framing of preservice teachers' questions and the responses to them created space for critical discussions that they were able to focus on and talk about social justice topics. And it also facilitated awareness of linguistic and cultural diversity around them. But the way they talked about these also sometimes led to overgeneralizations. We're going to present our findings under 3 themes. The first theme is how students use the language of disengagement and engagement in synchronous and asynchronous platforms, how they sometimes disengage from social justice topics, and how they sometimes engaged, and what kind of strategies they used and what they looked like, and how they use generic and specific frames of references in their questions. When they use generic references, they were able to talk more about broader society, and when they use specific frames of references, they most talked about themselves and their own experiences, and how in the responses they used singularity and multiplicity. When they used singular responses, it's sometimes created as a broad brush single picture, but when they used multiplicity, it created more awareness of diversity within their community.
The first finding we will focus on is the language of disengagement and engagement in both synchronous and asynchronous platforms. We identified that the language of engagement included asking follow-up questions, requesting elaboration, comparing a classmate's experience with their own experiences, and raising similar topics for further discussion. On the other hand, what we term the language of disengagement included providing assessments only, agreements only, and/or moving to switch topics, in some cases including explicit avoidance. The language of disengagement in our data seemed to manifest more often with topics that could be seen as politically charged or uncomfortable, especially in synchronous meetings. Our second finding focuses on both generic and specific frames of reference in pre-service teachers' questions. One factor that impacted how the pre-service teachers discussed social justice issues was the wording in the questions they posed to one another. This generic versus specific framing of the questions primed the respondents to sometime relay their own experiences as the norm, for example, focusing on singularity or their self-experience as the norm, or considering experiences from different points of view, in that case, focusing on multiplicity and comparing their own experiences to the experiences of others. We note that identifying these differences may be useful for other practitioners to consider when providing guidance during intercultural and computer-mediated interactions. The third finding focuses on singularity and multiplicity in students' responses. When pre-service teachers talked about their culture and community in a singular manner, they framed them as the same across every member in that community. On the other hand, when they referred to these communities acknowledging their multiplicity, the responses affirmed and explored the diversity within that community. The singular approach to cultures and communities could impact perceptions of minority and marginalized communities the most, because they were lost frequently in this type of representation, and their experiences and voices were not integrated into those narratives. In terms of our overall discussion, the first point is that we found pre-service teachers engage with social justice issues differently in synchronous versus asynchronous platforms. Critical conversations were less likely to occur in synchronous video conferences as compared with asynchronous discussion board postings. The relationship between different online formats and topics discussed may connect with previous research on social justice topics in telecollaborative spaces.
We found that when pre-service teachers engaged on critical topics, they made discursive choices that captured cultures and communities as generic, specific, multiple, or single. And these choices impact how their questions and responses connect to their interlocutors only or to broader society in question. Based on our findings, we also argue that all pre-service teachers, regardless of their context, alternated between specific and generic frames. This could be because they were uncertain about what is appropriate to say based on how they may be interpreted by their peers and assessed by their instructors. The range of framing in their discourse could be a symbol of this uncertainty and complexity in regards to having these kinds of conversations in electronically mediated communications. Intercultural telecollaboration can be an important pedagogical tool to connect teacher candidates across different cultures and engage them in conversations about equity and social justice, allowing them to better understand these issues when working with students who have inequitable access to educational resources. Focused and critical conversations during the telecollaboration can help create a space to discuss the issues of social justice and equity. We believe that language use and discourse need to be a focal component in intercultural telecollaborative exchanges.
While suggesting these intercultural telecollaborative projects as pedagogical tools, there are some points that we should keep in mind. For example, teacher educators should promote and demonstrate language that captures cultures and communities as specific, multiple, and ever-changing. And additionally, we should equip preserve teachers with strategies to engage on multicultural and social justice topics. And finally, instructors could train students to conduct research about their partners before these intercultural projects, so that they will be prepared for the stereotypes and generalizations.
While we believe the study had some success in terms of building intercultural communicative competence and raising awareness on social justice issues, it also had its limitations. First of all, in a telecollaboration like this, when we work with context in Turkey and context in the US. There's an 8-hour time difference, and it made it difficult to schedule synchronous meetings. And the calendars were also different, and the semesters at 2 schools started at different times, and it aligned only for 8 weeks out of a 15-week semester in both contexts. And the synchronous meetings were not monitored. Students had them in their own. Therefore, these conversations were more freely developed. And so we don't have a control on what got talked about and what didn't. And finally, we made an effort to design the courses in similar fashion. For example, we use the same textbook and same assignments and same grading criteria, but still the expectations might have been different in either context. And it is often came up as students at NAU talked more about their language development and their challenges in expressing themselves and how they experience these, while students at CCU talked more about their intercultural competence. So the expectations might have been different in both contexts. In terms of future directions and future cycles of telecollaborative project, or for anyone out there who would like to use this method for their pre-service teacher education programs, we believe it is important for the objectives, guidelines, and discussions to correspond and align with each other in both contexts, so that students' expectations can align with project goals, and so that they will be more coherent. We believe this is something we have learned in this cycle, and something we would like to do better in future cycles. Thank you very much for visiting our presentation. We hope you enjoyed it. Please let us know if you have any questions or comments, and we're looking forward to interacting with you on the discussion board. Thank you very much, and have a great day.